This meeting will come to order. Today is Tuesday, January 5th, 2016. This is a Prescott City Council workshop. And Pro Tem, do you have any announcements?
I don't have any announcements, and I could probably take an hour and a half and go around the room and introduce everybody, but I won't. But I will acknowledge Chief Monahan for being in our presence today. Chief, stand up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what your people do. They keep us safe. They keep us out of harm's way. They enforce the speed limits and all the other things that we're supposed to take care of in the city on a regular basis. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have invocation by Pastor Jesse Lyles of the Willow Hills Baptist Church, and I'll follow with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Father God, we pause at the beginning of this important meeting to say thank you to you for, first of all, being alive and being alive here in the Prescott, Arizona area, and for living in this great community. We do thank you not only for the folks like the policemen who serve, but many others who serve in various capacities of this city, and particularly these people on the council here. Thank you, Lord, for them, that they come and do their work from various life experiences they come from and bring their wealth of experiences. So thank you, Lord, that you will speak to them and help them and lead them and guide them in any discussions, not only today, but throughout this year. And Lord God, we give you thanks for a beautiful day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Please join me in a Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, go ahead and take the roll.
Mayor Oberg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Lamerson.
Here.
Councilman Blair.
Here.
Councilman Lozelle.
Here.
Councilwoman Orr. Here. Councilman Shiska.
Here.
And Councilwoman Wilcox. Here. All present.
City Manager, do you have any announcements?
No public announcements today, Mayor.
We have two proclamations, one on National Stalking Awareness Month, and that will be presented by Councilman Lozelle.
Oh, okay. I didn't even review it. Like that. You can do it. Chief, are you doing this one for me? Yep. See if we can get through this one without tripping over my tongue. This is a proclamation for National Stalking Awareness Month. Whereas under the laws of all 50 states, the U.S. territories, the District of Columbia, and the federal government, stalking is a crime. And whereas 7.5 million people are stalked in 1 year in the United States, and the majority of victims are stalked by someone they know. And whereas 3 in 4 women killed by an intimate partner has been stalked by an intimate partner. And whereas many stalking victims lose time from work and experience serious psychological distress and loss of productivity at a much higher rate than the general population, and whereas many stalking victims are forced to protect themselves by relocating, changing their identities, changing jobs, and obtaining protection orders. And whereas many stalkers use technology such as cell phones, global positioning systems, cameras, spyware to monitor and track their victims, and whereas there is a need for great public awareness about the nature, criminality, and potential lethality of stalking, and whereas laws and public policy must be continually adapted to keep pace with the new tactics used by stalkers, and whereas communities can better combat stalking by adapting multidisciplinary responses by teams of local agencies and organizations, and by providing more and better victim services. And whereas the City of Prescott is joining forces with victim service providers, criminal justice officials, and concerned citizens throughout Yavapai County and the United States to observe January as National Stalking Awareness Month. Now therefore, Harry Oberg, Mayor Prescott of Arizona, do hereby proclaim January 6, 2016 as Stalking Awareness Month. Chief?
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for this proclamation. This is in keeping hand in glove with your police department's efforts to continue to serve victims in a greater way, And stalking is one of those areas that certainly creates a huge fear in the hearts of victims, especially in the arena of domestic violence when people separate. To speak to some of your police department's efforts, Kevin Rother is our crime prevention officer, and he can speak to that.
Thank you, Chief. What we try to do, we're trying more to educate the people that are victims who are unaware that they're victims. They don't realize that it's actually against the law. So what we're trying to do is educate them more to report this, but also how they can help us to lead to a successful prosecution by, maintaining diaries, by maintaining evidence that they get, text messages, that kind of stuff. And a lot of people don't realize that it is, that it's illegal, and that there is something that we can do about that, and that we can press charges against people who do that. So, thank you, Chief.
Our second proclamation is Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, presented by Councilwoman Wilcox.
Hi, and you are?
I'm Hannah Stone from the Quad City Interfaith Camp.
I have the pleasure of reading the proclamation for Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, January 18, 2016. Whereas Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. devoted his life to advancing equality, social justice, and opportunity for all, and challenged all Americans to participate in the never-ending work of building a more perfect union. And whereas Dr. King's teaching can continue to guide and inspire us in addressing challenges in our communities. And whereas, since 1994, millions of Americans have been inspired by the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to serve their neighbors and communities on the King holiday. And whereas serving on the King holiday is an appropriate way to honor Dr. King, meet local and national needs, bring our citizens together, and strengthen our communities and nation. And whereas the King Day of Service is the only federal holiday commemorated as a national day of service and offers an opportunity for Americans to give back to their communities on the holiday and make an ongoing commitment to service throughout the year. And whereas King Day of Service projects are being organized by a committee of nonprofits, community organizations, and entities including Arizona Serve, Corporation for National and Community Service, and Prescott College. And whereas citizens of Prescott have an opportunity to participate in events throughout our county on King Day of Service, January 18, 2016, as well as support ongoing volunteer needs and commit to meaningful service throughout the year. Now therefore, I, Mayor Harry B. Oberg of Prescott, proclaim the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday as a day of service in Prescott and call upon the people of Prescott to pay tribute to the life and works of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. through participation in community service projects on Martin Luther King Day and throughout the year. Would you like to say a few words?
Oh, no. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We have two presentations. One today will be from Chamber of Commerce, Introduction to New Business.
Happy New Year, Mayor and Council. My name is Neil, and I'm the Membership Director for the Prescott Chamber. The community is invited to attend our annual meeting held on Thursday, January 28th. The event begins promptly at 4 p.m. in the Yavapai College Performing Arts Center. Now, this is an opportunity to hear nationally recognized economist Elliot Pollock provide a 2016 Prescott economic forecast. This event is free for Chamber members, but it does require registration by calling our office or signing up at prescott.org. The Prescott Chamber ended 2015 by adding these new members: Mortimer Nursery, A&B Marketing Solutions, Preparedness Headquarters, Prescott Police Foundation, Prescott Realty, Southwestern Eye Care, Spruce Mountain Vacation Rentals, the Art Store, and the Prescott Saver Coupon Book. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Our second presentation is going to be from Friends of Jersey Lily, report on the courthouse lighting fundraising, presented by Tommy Meredith and Gary Edelbrock.
Happy New Year to you, Mayor and Council, and City Manager Mr. Palladini. And anyhow, Mr. Meredith and I stood before this council approximately 3 months ago, and we kicked off our little fundraising event for the Friends of Jersey Lily. And it's a partnership between us, the Prescott Downtown Partnership, and the Chamber to raise funds for the Christmas tree lighting here, or the plaza lighting, or courthouse lighting, however is politically correct in our world today. And my world is Christmas, so I'll say it's Christmas tree lighting. But I think that most of the comments that Tommy and I have heard, that this is the most successful effort ever, and the veterans, the Triangle Island, the entrance to the city was lit this year by our fundraising efforts. And I'll let Mr. Meredith tell you, because he's going to give you the final amount that our group raised. And if we had a timpani, I'd ask for a timpani, but I'm sure you'll know what I'm doing. Tommy.
Thanks, Gary. Council, Mayor Council, I guess. Harry, Steve, Billy, welcome. New faces, and I see they have the women equally separated between the men. Is there a reason for that? Harry, you draw a straight line here, I guess. You've heard all this before, and it's a day that I think of thank yous more than anything. We did do fairly well this year, and I don't know where we're going to go from here. I really don't, but somebody once said that we came a long way, baby. And if you go back to 8 years ago, and Bob Luce is telling me that after complaining about the lack of funds available for the lighting, he said, why don't you do something about it? And I've told you this before, to just recently when ex-mayor Marlon Kirkendall challenged us to beat the city as far as what they donate. And I can tell you this year, officially, Dave Mauer's here. I've got a little money that he doesn't know about yet, but the total is $32,414 as of today's, and I think we're finished. I'm tired, but anyway, like Gary said, I think it was a nice event this year. And just a few other comments. There's other events that I would use the word that feed off of this. How would you like to have an Acro night without the lights? The courthouse lighting function itself wouldn't be here if we didn't have the lights. The boot drop, I don't think would be nearly as successful like it was, by the way. If you weren't here, there was people from Crosswalk to Gurley could walk shoulder to shoulder and never touch the ground. And I get a big kick out of people who say, I don't go down to the city. I wouldn't go down there. And all those people. And, I say, well, I pull out my camera and I show them my picture. I say, what do you think of all these people? And they say, oh, my God. And I say, well, they're down here for one reason. They're having fun. But if you don't want to have fun, you don't have to come down. So that's kind of the way it works. The big thank yous are the people of Prescott. And interesting fact is that we don't have any donation more than $1,000. And we raised 32, so there's a lot of people in between that. And most of you here, Steve and all of you guys, Blairs and the Jimmys and the Moores and the Harrys and everybody has donated, and I really appreciate it, and it means an awful lot. Cindy Barks with the paper has been very cooperative as far as giving us some ability to market this thing. It's not like you're marketing a business for profit. You're marketing a event for the town. So they've surely done their part. KYCA, particularly Steve Blair, has been very helpful, and Mary Ann and the staff over there at KYCA have given us a lot of time, which I really do appreciate. It means an awful lot, and kind of give us some kind of a legitimate positioning on this thing. That's about it. I can say that our committee, we went from one or two of us. Now, as Gary's on the council committee, and my wife, and about 6 other people put this whole thing on, and it's a lot of work, and more than I ever dreamed of. And I'm glad the fall season's over with all the things from rodeo to now. It's quite demanding, but I enjoyed it, and the rewards will make it worthwhile. And people stop you on the sidewalk and thank you for what you do. It means a lot. And so thanks to you and City of Prescott.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, and we appreciate all your efforts. And I know last, I guess it was this year, Mayor Kirkendall said he wanted to challenge you to match the funds that we provided by the city, and you actually exceeded that. So I guess next year you're going to challenge us.
Well, I'll think about that. Maybe you guys will give me some more parameters to work around, maybe make it easier. But I appreciate your comment very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy.
Okay, before we go to discussion of items for our normal business here, I'd like to go ahead and just let you know that as we're looking forward to where we're going to try and run things in February, we're going to be looking at going later in the day for our meetings. We anticipate we'll probably have more people coming in and more discussion from the public on various issues. So I think many of you, when you come in, you've seen the sign over there that indicates that you should try and limit your comments to 5 minutes. And you know, in my experience of observing out there and being up here for a little while, some people's internal clocks seem to be an op. So we're going to go ahead and observe the 5-minute rule. I have a clock here, and when you get down to 30 seconds, I'll give you a 30-second warning anytime we're having public comment. I'm not going to hold anybody on the council here to 5 minutes at a time. But anyway, just look forward to that as we go forward here in this meeting and future meetings. Go ahead and give us the first item.
Item 1A, changes in financial reporting of pension liabilities.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is very exciting for the new year to start with the presentation on accounting standards. I'm truly excited. 2 weeks ago, we issued our annual financial report, and there is a new government financial standard that is in there related to pensions, so we wanted to go over it briefly with the Council. So in starting, GASB, or the Governmental Accounting Standard Board, is an independent organization that establishes the standards for financial accounting and financial reporting for governments across the country. GASB goes through a very extensive process to do this. It takes years to get these pronouncements done because they have public hearings across the country. They take input, they make adjustments, and they move on. So it is a very public process that they go through. Neither GASB nor FASB, the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which sets standards for everybody else other than government in the United States, are government agencies. They're actually private sector entities. Both GASB and FASB are operated as component units of the Financial Accounting Foundation, which is a private sector not-for-profit entity, so they are not the government. If you look back at GASB's history, about every 10 years they look at pension liabilities and other post-employment benefits and come out with new standards to address current issues related to those. This is their current one, obviously, that we're going to talk about today. There are several standards that they implemented in the last few years for this. The main two that we're going to focus on today are GASB 67 and GASB 68. So 67 is focused on the pension plans, the pension trusts, and talk about their measurement of these liabilities and their financial reporting for the pension plan, which is the separate legal entities. The GASB 68 is focused at the government entities, the entities that belong to these pension plans and have employees in them. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, our fiscal year 15 CAFR, which is now available on our website, complies with GASB 68, and we're going to go over those changes. The new reporting requirements have significantly more note disclosure, specific presentation of the net pension liabilities and deferred inflows and outflows on the financial statements, as well as some other supplemental information out there. Again, GASB does accounting and financial reporting standards. The liability the purpose of these latest set of standards is to come up with a standardized measurement of these liabilities and reporting these liabilities across all governments of the country. So it'll be easier to compare governments, compare pension liabilities as we look across the state and the country as a whole. And also keep in mind that GASB does not create these liabilities or dictate how these liabilities will be funded. All those actuarial assumptions are left to the trusts and the politicians that deal with the trusts. GASB is just involved in the financial reporting requirements, so that is something to keep in mind. GASB didn't create these liabilities, so don't get mad at GASB for them, but it does standardize how they are reported. So looking at the two pension plans that the City of Prescott is part of course, the Arizona State Retirement System, ASRS, it's considered a cost-sharing multiple employer defined benefit plan, which means the ASRS trust, all the assets and all the liabilities are pooled into one trust, and the contribution rate is the same across all participating entities. The liability is held at that trust, and so if our rate goes up, not Phoenix, they're on a different one, but Scottsdale and the other governments that are part of it, their rates go up. It's all the same across the state. GASB 68 acknowledges these pooled liabilities, but also still felt that they need to be reported on the face of the financial statements. And we'll talk a little later about what the difference is. But so the proportionate share of ASRS's liability needs to be reported on the city's balance sheet. It's about 0.2% is all Prescott's share is of that liability as a percentage. Again, all city employees that are not part of PSPRS are part of this system. Roughly around 450 currently active city employees are part of this system. Looking at ASRS as a whole, to give you an idea of the size, there's over 500,000 people in ASRS with about 130,000 currently receiving benefits. It's a nice big pool. It's actuarially sound, in my opinion. I mean, it's big enough to be actuarially sound. And we've talked about that when we talk about PSPRS, how it's way too small to be sound financially. Again, that's about 20% of the 500,000 are currently receiving benefits. It's a good proportion. PSPRS, or Public Safety Personnel Retirement System, which we've talked a lot about over the last 5 years, and especially the last year, is considered an agent multiple employer defined pension plan. Assets are pooled for investing, but the liability and even those assets are separated into individual agency accounts for each of the participating agencies. So the liability for the City of Prescott is not commingled with the liability for Prescott Valley or Phoenix or any of the other entities. They're all individually separated, so all the rates, the contribution rates, are different across the state. All the city sworn police and fire are members of the PSPRS, and even in that, the City of Prescott has two separate PSPRS trusts, the police and the fire. Here we have the population of all PSPRS. Even that is only 32,000 when you look statewide. Pretty small pension plan just in itself, but they compound that, of course, as we've talked about before, by every agency being individually assessed rates. And again, ours are 137 members in police and 123 in fire, with less than half, are about half are currently receiving benefits.
Just one question on the inactive members. Who was that?
Those are employees that were part of the pension. They're eligible for retirement benefit, but they are no longer working and they aren't receiving benefits yet. So they worked as a policeman, let's say 10 years, and now they're doing something else, and then when they get up to the age that they're eligible, they'll receive a benefit. So another issue or another aspect of the GASB 68 is expense reporting. Prior to GASB 68, essentially what you paid in your contributions as determined by the actuarial rate is what you showed as an expense. With GASB 68, there's a lot of other factors in there. The primary portion of it is whatever changes the liability is what your expense is. Makes sense. It's a good way to show what the real change or the real cost of that is during a year is what the change in that expense is. So I got a little comparison on this schedule. Looking at ASRS, our pension contributions were $2 million approximately. The GASB 68 pension expense with that change in liability is about $2 million. That's great. That's what you'd expect. Obviously, PSPRS pension contributions were about $4 million, and as you can see, the GASB 68 pension expense, the change in that liability was $9 million. So it's $5 million higher than it would have been under pre-GASB 68 as far as how it's reported on the city-wide financial statements. Again, it's an important aspect to kind of see how, in my opinion, how those contributions correlate to actual expenses. And again, that's why GASB thought it was important to change this so that on your statement of activity, you're legitimately showing what the cost is of police and fire, in this case, was this year. You know, it's $5 million more than it would be if we just looked at what we contributed. So looking at the funding of these two pensions, pension-wide, as you can see, SRS is, these come from the GASB 67 reports that were put out by the individual pensions. As you can see, ASRS is about 70% funded with a $14.8 billion deficit, but 70% funded is a good funding level for a pension. Most pensions have some level of liability because that liability is measured over the next 30 or 40 years, so there is a reason to have some level of liability. The PSPRS, even PSPRS wide, is a $6 billion deficit, about less than 50% funded. Again, Prescott's in bad shape. Our funding levels are about 25% and 30%, so we're significantly at the lower end of that, where other agencies or entities are well above that, bringing the overall to 48. But even at 48 as a whole, it's not as healthy as you would generally like to see. So what is the liabilities that we have to report? Again, ASRS, we have to do our proportional share of that liability. That's even though that liability will be paid for by the trust by the rate across all participating agencies over the next 50 years, we still need to report our share. 0.2% of that is $30 million. The GASB 67 required liability or calculated liability for police is $35 million, and fire is $36 million, for a total of $101 million that we need to show on the face of our statement. Now, just quickly here, the footnote on this page to talk about how it was reported prior. ASRS, because of the type of liability it is, a pooled liability that's paid for by contributions across, was part of the ASRS financial report, which was a separately issued report by the trust, and we referred to that report in our financial report in the footnotes that it existed and that information could be found there. The PSPRS liability, because it's always been a liability more directly related to the city, has always been, not always, but has for the last 15 years been reported in the notes to the financial statement. So that liability has always been reported. It was reported at the funding level actuarial statements, not the GASB 67 calculated rate, which is a more consistent rate across the country, just for more consistency and comparing. So these liabilities were there. They have been presented before. Wanted to go through the city's basic financial statements real quick. Again, recording of the net pension liability is done in the proprietary funds and on the city-wide statement. It is not done in the governmental fund presentations that are individual away from the entity-wide. Additionally, the other changes in the note disclosure and supplemental information added about 16 pages to this year's CAFR. So it is an extensive additional disclosure. That's in addition to the changes it made to the statements that were in there before. A lot of good information. The next few slides, I've taken extracts from that information to talk about. It's not a full disclosure of everything that's presented based on GASB 68. That is available in our full comprehensive annual financial report, which is available for this year and the last 5 years on the city's website at prescott-az.gov. This is what it'll look like when you get there. And again, we can have a full day session on reading the CAFR and what's all in there if council would like. Be glad to do that for you. Or we can do it individually if any of you have information. In the financial statement, we have entity-wide schedules. This is the statement of net position. It's basically the city's balance sheet as a whole, all activity of the city rolled up. This is the asset portion of it. As you can see, it's typical assets. You can see we have $658 million in assets at the city. One of the new items this year I've highlighted in boxes on these statements. Deferred outflows related to pensions. It's more of an accounting issue, but it relates to bringing that pension liability to current terms. Because, of course, we're reporting 1 year late because it takes the pension trust a year to get their reports out for us to have that. So part of that reconciliation is this deferred outflow. On the liabilities and net position portion of the statement of net position, you can see our total liabilities at $230 million. Of that, of course, $101 million is this net pension liability, which is there. And then there's a deferred outflow that is also related to that push forward entry to get those liabilities current. The net position portion of the statement shows basically your equity portion of your balance sheet, and as you can see, we have $439 million in net position, but by recording the liability, it did move our unrestricted net position to a negative position, a negative $17 million there. So that is, a change, a significant change if you're an accountant on the financial look and the statement and what it all means. The other entity-wide statement, again, in the CAFR, there's only two statements that are actually combined entity-wide, the statement of net position and the statement of activities. There's a lot going on this statement. Mainly one to look at the expense column, which is all the way to the left there, shows the expenses. These are legitimate expenses. When we do budget and talk about other things, we talk about expenditures. Difference between expenses and expenditures is primarily expenditures include capital, they include repayment of principal on debt, things that aren't considered expenses when you look at a for-profit entity. This statement, all that stuff is taken out, and expenses are shown, including depreciation expense, which isn't something that is considered an expenditure. So it allows you to come down here and see in general government, our expenses to run the general government was $3.7 million. Just using that one line to go across to get a feel for the statement. Direct charges, fees for stuff that happened was $837,000. There was some operating grants of $70,000, and then a small capital grant, giving a net impact to the tax base, if you will, to the general revenues, which is primarily the taxes, of $2.8 million. That's the part that has to come out of that general tax. So as you look across these schedules, you can see, as you work across, you can see what the impact is to the general revenue base of the city. And again, as you get down into the business type activities, it is there as well. The bottom half of the statement shows those general revenues, which include the general property tax. It includes the franchise taxes. It includes the privilege tax, both general fund and the streets fund. And these are, and again, they're more of they're a full accrual method of reporting, which is different from the governmental funds, which are modified accrual. And when we do our full day presentation, we'll spend an hour on what the differential is between those two, but we'll just skip over it for today. Again, the other things, the intergovernmental revenues from the state are general revenues and those type of things for a total general revenue about $43 million that makes up the deficit there. So I have another schedule later, but we'll talk about the police and fire expenses and how those compare to what they looked like before in relation to the expense. Some of the note disclosure, and again, these are just excerpts from the notes. Please feel free to get on and read the full note disclosure. One of the things is the discount rate. We've talked a lot about that for PSPRS this last year. GASB felt it was important. There was a note disclosure of how did you come up with your discount rate that you used for the valuation in the GASB 67 statements. As you can see, the pension has to identify the asset classes of investments, the projected long-term rate, and the percentage that they're in it. That gives them a weighted expectation of a discount rate, which also includes an inflation factor. So ASRS in this case used an 8.79% discount rate, and this is how they came up with it. Again, the notes go a lot more into detail. Just wanted to cover some of the interesting things that I think are interesting in the new note disclosures. Another item is the sensitivity of the net pension liability to the discount rate. You know, oh, you said it's 8, I really think it's 7. What does that mean? So for each of the pension liabilities, there's this sensitivity. This is ASRS again. So if the discount rate is not 8, as they said, but 1% less at 7, the pension liability wouldn't have been 30 million, it would be 38 million. And if the discount rate is, our earnings rate is actually higher at 9, it would only be 25. It's just to give the reader, the user of the financial report, a feel for what it means if the discount rate is wrong. Also included are disclosure of how benefits are calculated for each of the pensions. This is a table for the PSPRS, you know, how the pensions are calculated over time. So that was just a real quick look at some of the note disclosures. In addition to that, there's some required supplemental information that's out there, which has a 10-year trend. Of course, since it's a new statement, there's no 10 years yet. It's only the last year, so that'll be more useful as we get out over time. But what does it mean? What does the new pension reporting mean to the city? The city's bond rating, that's been a big concern. You got $101 million more of liability on the face of your statement. Is your bond rating going to be downgraded? As we discussed, these pension liabilities are not new. They've always existed. They were in the notes. The people who rate bonds are intelligent people who are in this market. They know they're there. They've said the liability reporting in itself should not affect a city or entity's bond rating. There's a lot of factors that affect a bond rating, but the liability has always been there. The people who rate knew it was there. They read the notes. They read the other statements. So we'll see when we do our next bond rating update, which is probably about a year away. I did them last January with the agencies, so we'll find out next January. Including the net pension liability in the statement of net position, which was the balance sheet, does reduce our unrestricted equity, from 68 million to a negative 17. We talked about that. Got to keep in mind, you know, that's not good. It's an impact on the statement, but keep in mind our net position, our equity side of it is still $439 million. So it is not good, but it is what it is. Again, these liabilities were there. They were note disclosure before. They're just moved to the face of the statement to make it a little more obvious. And we talked about the expense criteria. You know, that has a factor as well. If we look at police and fire from 2014's statement of activity to this year, you can see definitely showing a bigger burden of police and fire on the city's revenues. You know, GASB would argue, I would say, that it's more realistic of what the real expense is because of that increasing pension liability. So with that is a hopefully quick synopsis of what the changes are in the new CAFR that is out on the web. Encourage you all to read it, and again, be glad to do more discussion on the CAFR as a whole, either individually or as a group as a whole. With that, any questions?
Do I have any comments from the panel? Well, I think it's a lot of information to digest and try and work our way through the numbers, so I guess we'll have to probably come and see you individually on anything that we find. So.
Yes, definitely, Mayor, be glad to talk to you individually or anything else on the CAFR. The CAFR's got a lot of information in it, a lot of good information. It is the only audited financial report we put out. Of course, award-winning. We get an award the last several years for excellence in financial reporting, so I would encourage citizens and council alike to read the CAFR.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Sure.
I'd like to move on to our second presentation.
Item 1B, sign code amendments.
Mayor and Council, we have had a number of discussions about this, both for the former council and the new council. And what you have before you today is a draft ordinance which would in effect, let me just back it up. The current city code essentially bans any temporary signs in the right of way. But over time, a number of exceptions have been adopted to that ban where, as a practical matter, pretty much the exception swallows the rule. So the ordinance draft before you today for discussion deletes most of those or all of those exceptions to, and if the code or if the ordinance is adopted, would essentially be a prohibition or ban on temporary signs in the right of way. There are sort of three options for the council to discuss and give direction on in the ordinance, which are a little bit more discretionary. The first is the discussion on the A-frame or sandwich signs. The current draft that you have allows for those in the downtown historic district or a downtown area, and that's defined in the ordinance. So the options for council in terms of going forward are leave that exception in for only the downtown area, leave it in for some larger area, not limited to downtown, or allow those types of sandwich board signs, citywide, or delete it altogether. I mean, those are sort of policy decisions for the council to make. The second option for the council is there's a provision in there that discusses the bus board or bus stop advertising, essentially the bus benches. The current ordinance or the current city code allows for bus bench advertising, but only by the operator of the public transit, which in Prescott we have one or more operators of public transit. It's not like a Valley Metro down in the valley. So that presents a potential problem that the current city code reads that anybody who purports to operate a public transit type company would be allowed to place benches at bus stops on which there could be some sort of advertising or message. And just as a note, those bus stops have to be approved by the city engineer or somebody in public works. They can't just be at the choice of the transit operator. So the draft currently proposes to allow that practice to continue, but it changes it from restricting it to the operator of the public transit or operators of public transit to essentially one RFP that would go out to highest, most responsible bidder. Essentially, they would bid to the city to have the ability to place bus benches in designated spots designated as bus stops by the city engineer, and in return for that, they'd be able to sell advertising on those benches. There are other options certainly to contemplate as well. You could get rid of them altogether. In other words, you could get rid of the ability to put ads on those benches, and just allow for the benches in which with no messages on them. And then the third option before you is in the current ordinance draft. There is a proposed amendment to the Land Development Code. We presented that to the Planning Commission in December, and their recommendation was to remove that from this particular ordinance and allow for a sort of wholesale revision to the Land Development Code sign code, and do it sort of comprehensively all at once. That, I certainly don't have any objection or legal issues with that. In fact, it sort of makes sense to look at just the sort of city code right-of-way issues in one ordinance, and then comprehensively through the process of UDC and then Planning Commission and Council make wholesale changes sort of overall to the Land Development Code. So that could easily be just struck out of this particular draft. Other than that, like I said, we've gone through this a number of times, a couple PowerPoints and memos and all, so I really don't have anything further to present. Certainly happy to answer any questions that you might have going forward.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
John, I've got a couple questions. On the sandwich signs, why would we allow them in the downtown area and not anywhere else?
Well, I think from a planning perspective or a land use perspective, so those A-frame or sandwich board type signs are really sort of pedestrian oriented. They're not auto oriented, and our downtown historic area is more pedestrian oriented. So it's sort of a planning concept. Certainly, like I said, the council has the ability to allow them citywide, allow them, not allow them at all, or some broader area. But that's kind of comes out of a planning notion that they're really geared to pedestrian walk-by type messages rather than auto or car related messages. Because they're relatively small, you know,
Right.
and you know the idea is that they're relatively small and may or may not be noticed by someone driving by on, let's say, a main arterial.
And the standards where they're placed, that provision will remain in the city code, and that's determined by the city manager?
You know, if the council chooses to allow those A-frame type signs at some place, they're limited to one sign of a particular size in front of the brick and the brick and mortar type store. So, just for example, if the council were to go forward with allowing those A-frames within the downtown historic area, you'd be able to put one sort of A-frame sign with a particular size limit directly in front of the store, or the whether it's the bar, the store, the restaurant, or in case of Bashford Court, the facility.
But they still have to leave 48 inches.
Correct. There has to be. They
walkway.
have to meet all the ADA requirements. So it would have the right to do it, but obviously there'd be certain exceptions depending on the width of the sidewalk and whatever other sort of encumbrances there may be for people to pass by, including primarily ADA type accessibility.
Okay. So in other words, I'm looking at section 8-2-4, the title of which is exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a provision L, I think, I or L. It says sidewalk sales by duly licensed businesses adjacent thereto. That was in attachment 1 of our materials.
Right.
That provision is not being deleted, or you're not proposing that would be
No,
deleted?
because no,
Okay.
the that's not part of. That's the actual getting a permit to have a sidewalk sale immediately in front. It's K, the one that precedes that sandwich sign,
Right.
would be the limitation. 31 inches wide, which is 2.5 feet, and no taller than 50, which is a little over 4. But again, and then there's some conditions about one, in front of the property and can't obstruct accessibility, those kinds of things. So it would continue to allow, the current draft continues to allow those, but in a limited geographic area. But certainly the council could expand the area, could allow it for citywide. The one thing that probably couldn't or shouldn't change is to have it off premise. In other words, if it's not in front of your building but a block away, that's potentially problematic.
Okay. And then my other comment was about the bus benches. I think we should eliminate signs on bus benches altogether, because we don't really have a public transportation system. It's a private enterprise, and to me it gives an unfair advantage to a private business to use public right-of-way.
Councilman Lozelle.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilwoman Wilcox on the bus benches. I think it does give an unfair advantage, and it is a private entity. I also have I'm probably just going to get blasted for this. I just have a problem with making an exception for downtown, even though I love it. But I mean, there are businesses all around town, just not downtown. And if we're thinking about a comprehensive in the right of way sign ordinance, I just feel it should be consistent all through town if we're going to go that route and not have an exemption there. But that's all I have to say. That the exemption is where I have a problem with downtown compared to everywhere else.
Councilman Chiska. Thank you. Mr. Palladini,
am I to understand that in the beginning of your presentation you said that we had at one time a ban on signs in public right-of-ways?
Yes, in current city code 8-2-3, A says that use, in paraphrasing, use of city right-of-way or sidewalk owned by the city for purposes of advertising or making sales or placing signs is prohibited.
And how long has that been in
I know
force?
It's been in effect longer than I've been here. So, but I think, in fact, yesterday I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Perry. He's been working on right-of-way signs since I think 1994, maybe earlier, and in terms of, so this has been an issue I think for quite some time. I don't know if it was all done all at once. In other words, create the prohibition and then adopt all the exceptions. In reading the code, I get the sense that they were sort of added on sort of as needed, but I don't have any particular time frames. But if you look at 824, there are exceptions all the way from A through I think R with the and so there's a whole bunch of exceptions which effectively get rid of the prohibition altogether.
So are we chasing our tail here? I mean, really, from the standpoint of are we set to just redo history again?
Well, it's sort of hard to predict the future, but I will say that the problem with with this Reed versus Gilbert case law is that the minute you create an exception for one, you've effectively created an exception for all. So as we've sort of talked in very shorthand way, this is sort of an all or nothing proposition. You can try and be very nuanced and try and be very sort of subtle and make these try and make these distinctions, but over time I just think that the minute you start working on making exception for this or exception for that, you're going to run into problems, and ultimately you're creating exceptions for all.
Well, it seems to me like what created the exceptions were people who actually came up and said, that's not fair to me, or that's not fair to my business, and so we want you to change this.
Right. And prior to Reed versus Gilbert, the courts have interpreted sort of content-based regulations as sort of allowing certain speakers to speak and not other speakers, not this, and didn't get into the distinction between, if you have to look at the sign to tell what it says, then that's content-based. And so the difference between a real estate sign now and a political sign and a Budweiser sign and a garage sale sign there is none. In other words, from a right-of-way, temporary right-of-way perspective, there is no difference under constitutional analysis for these types of temporary signs. So the sort of fairness factor is, from a legal perspective, I won't talk from sort of a fairness, but the Supreme Court has also said that from a fairness perspective or a speech perspective, a sort of across-the-board ban doesn't discriminate against anybody because everybody's treated the same.
So from the standpoint of Reed versus Gilbert that initiated this whole conversation, it's going to make it a lot harder to vote on this thing right now, and if we vote from the standpoint of no signs, it's going to be harder to make exceptions?
Yes, absolutely. It will be. In other words, the minute you create one exception, I think what's going to happen is you open the door for everybody else.
The camel's nose is in the tent?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, the camel's hump is in the tent.
The camel's hump is in the tent. Thank you. Whatever we do, I don't want it to degrade to what it's degraded to now. Thank you.
Councilman Blair?
Well, it's interesting to listen to all the comments. I think going back as a business, if you want to draw attention to yourself, there's other avenues to do that. And I have a real difficult time understanding that we're in a budget crunch, and these laws that we're enacting as a body generally have to be enforced by someone. And we just cut one of our code enforcement people, so we have one person for the whole city of Prescott. I think it's absolutely ridiculous to believe that we can control any of it by law. And if you are enacting a law that you can't control, why have the law? So from my standpoint, I say you enact it where nobody is allowed to have signs in the right-of-way. From my standpoint, to treat a different business differently in different parts of this community is unfair and unwarranted as far as I'm concerned. So I would support no signs in the right-of-way, period.
Councilwoman Orr.
Well, I guess I won't stand out here and I disagree in that I believe that our downtown is unique. And I've talked to businesses downtown and asked about the sandwich boards, and I don't think they all look great. However, it is a pedestrian area, and if I'm walking down the street and, go out and look at the awning or look at the front window, but I believe they serve a purpose. And I believe our downtown is unique. And so I would support giving business the option to have sandwich boards.
Councilman Lozelle.
I'd forgotten one last point. I've been sneezing.
I noticed.
To add to the sandwich board, if we're going to do sandwich boards, then why? I know several people that have businesses just outside of downtown. Why can't they have sandwich boards in the right of way in front of their business? Also, when we discussed this last time, we were going to give broader leeway and reduce restrictions on private property. And I know you said those are going to be two separate, but I'm hoping that those boards and commissions bring that to us in that manner later.
Well, I can tell you that on the land development code, because land development code obviously deals with signage on private property. So the planning staff is working on, drafting revisions and amendments to the current sign code to sort of relax it a little bit, to allow for maybe more signage on the private property, primarily the non-residential, and that's moving forward. But I think the Planning Commission's concern was that amending just a piece of the land development code in this ordinance was kind of too piecemeal, and they wanted to see sort of a comprehensive look on how we do it. So that would be sort of part two of this project.
Okay, thank you. And as far as, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and if a motion was made, I know we're not voting today, and it put the exception to downtown just to get this done with and in accordance with, so we're not in violation with the Supreme Court, I'd go with that, but I'd prefer to just be all or nothing for everyone. It's the same for everyone.
Councilman Blair.
Real quick, I'm not quite sure. All these sandwich boards and the things that you're doing is to draw attention to a business. That's just plain and simple. So when you have businesses that also have flags or temporary signage up for holiday sale or these kind of things, they are immediately to draw attention to your business. We have those by special permit. Let's say a car dealership puts up flags or True Value Hardware or whatever the case may be. It's to draw your attention to your business. At some point in time, it's fair game that everybody should have the opportunity to do that, or you preclude it altogether. From a management standpoint, and a code standpoint, and enforcement standpoint, I think you have a very difficult time managing any of it, so I would preclude them all.
And let me just say that the land development code amendments or the draft, that will deal with private property temporary signage. Remember, this is strictly right of way. And I think the other sort of planning concept, and I'm glad you brought that up, Councilman, was that the sort of downtown area doesn't really have much, I guess, frontage. In other words, there aren't parking lots, and that was the other reason that staff thought, well, maybe there was an exception for the downtown area, because there's basically your frontage is your sidewalk, is the right of way, rather than a parking lot or something else like that. So where you could have some temporary or some setbacks or something like that, where you could have temporary signage. So those are the concepts. Again, it's completely up to the council, whether you want to ban it altogether, allow it in a certain area, allow it citywide, or allow it in part of the city and not part. Again, because we're not talking about the content of the message, we're talking about the form, or the medium that you would use, an A-frame sandwich sign limited to a particular size and in a particular area or citywide. So it's not, and that message is unlimited. In other words, we don't tell people what they can put on their sandwich boards, whether it's advertising lunch or a political message or something else.
Councilman Shiska. Thank you. Again, I'd like to avoid the camel's hump, nose, whatever
getting back into the tent. So if in fact, to be honest with you, I don't mind the A-frames downtown. But I also don't want to go through this exercise again and again and again and again. And so if in fact we say, okay, no signs in the public right away except in the downtown area, have we made an exception and let that camel's nose back in the tent?
Well, from a legal standpoint, I can tell you no, because it doesn't, that exception, for instance, doesn't create an obligation to create more exceptions. But I think once, because it's very specific, and there's a very specific sort of rational basis for doing that, I really can't answer it from a political perspective, because who knows what happens in the future. But again, we once you start sort of opening the door more and more to the type, and what really the big concern is that we start creating acceptance for the type of business or the type of message. Then you've really basically opened the door for everybody. So, that's the challenge. I mean, not just Prescott, but every city in the country is facing. Certainly, I think Flagstaff has recently adopted a ban with a few minor exceptions, and cities are moving forward to try and figure out how to deal with this court ruling.
So are you saying that the exceptions past this would be more political than they would be legal?
Well, they were policy or small p political type decisions that were made. I don't think they were made based on a legal recommendation that you should create this exception. Again, I can't speak for them because I wasn't here at the time, but they appear to be sort of policy level decisions.
Thank you.
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a reason why people in a free market system pick and choose where they decide to hang their shingle. Nobody holds a gun to anybody's head where to hang your shingle. The fact that you may not be able to afford it is not the government's responsibility to try and make it all fair for everybody. I am in the downtown. I want to talk about my business. That's why I'm here. But the fact of the matter is, I chose to pay a higher rent in a higher rent district for a reason. I don't necessarily think it's government's responsibility to try and equal a playing field for everybody who chooses to run their businesses to have a place to market their business. I think it's up to the business to do that. So from my perspective, I would think that we should probably either ban them all or say have the city look like a trash heap. But you don't pick and choose winners and losers.
Councilwoman Wilcox.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple thoughts regarding the downtown sandwich boards. When Councilwoman Orr mentioned how unique our downtown is, it occurred to me that in the downtown area we have a lot of businesses within businesses. For example, the Bashford Courts and St. Michael's. We've got quite a number of businesses that don't have that street frontage. So that even the pedestrian may not be aware that there's something very interesting to buy back in there. And in my mind, that would justify treating downtown a little differently. Also, banning sandwich boards downtown in our historic area may actually result in more sign clutter on the building itself. We'll have to see how the Land Development Code proposal comes to the council. But the people who have those businesses inside the building would want an opportunity to tell the buying public that there's something inside that building. So there's going to have to be some other little sign that pops up. And that may again go through the Historic Preservation Commission, which will be a process then for the business owner. So to me, the sandwich boards downtown are the lesser of two evils.
At this point, I'll open it up to the public if anybody has a comment on the sign ordinance.
Come on, Tommy.
I didn't come here prepared to talk about signs, but obviously we're involved with them. We are a business upstairs without access to the sidewalk. Billy's point is well taken. If you're looking at this from the Alpine Village up in the mountains and the cute little shops and the women's napkins and all that sort of thing, it kind of goes with it, you know. But the other side of the coin, where you give a partial okay and not the whole town, I can see, particularly in this town right now, where you're going to get some challenges. So I think it's a hard. And when I first came here, I thought they were trashy and junky, and we do have some regulations on the size of signs and where they're supposed to be placed and everything, and I don't think that's really addressed too often. And Gene's point, if you don't have a sidewalk sign and you are upstairs or in the building, are you going to be going in for new sign to put on your entryway and your walls and everything else? You know, where's that dividing line? Yeah, so you may have a junky front entrance to the businesses to get identification, whereas now it's on the sidewalk. They knock the heck out of mine all the time. I have to go out there and beat it out with a hammer. But there is some, you know, negative aspects of them. If everybody on downtown did not have one, you might say, well, we're all equal. But for the reasons that's been given, it's hard to know that somebody's up there. And it's us being upstairs, you know, the people spend a lot of their time just looking up.
But if I'm thirsty, I know where I'm going.
I got you well educated, though. See, so you know, given more time to research this and talk about it, you know, may have something else to add. But it's our town; it is unique. But you're going to have people challenging everything. I know that's coming, and I like Steve's and both Steve's position that. Why open it up to more regulation and complications and challenges and all that sort of thing? It's a tough one. I guess that's why you guys ran for council. You have to make a decision here. But anyway, listening with interest. I'll be interested to see how this comes out. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm glad you didn't depend on the government to market Jersey lilies.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Matson. I just wanted to throw something out there. If we ban all the sandwich board signs downtown, who wants to bet you find a lot more sign spinners? Because a person holding a sign is a whole different matter, if I understand the whole thing correctly. And I don't know that we want a whole bunch of them standing all over the sidewalks either. Just a thought.
Thanks, Dan.
What is the rule with people that spin signs?
Well, it's a different analysis under the Constitution. It's more like someone handing out handbills than it is a temporary sign. And then, sort of to make matters worse, a couple of years ago, the state legislature adopted a sort of prohibition on cities for banning these sign walkers on sidewalks. Scottsdale, Charter City, took the state to court and ended up losing at the Court of Appeals. One of the trial court lost at Court of Appeals. The court basically saying that the state legislature sort of deemed this a matter of statewide concern, and the state legislature had the power, and the governor signed the bill, and therefore it's very difficult to ban. I keep wanting to say streetwalkers, but that's not the right term. Sign walkers on sidewalks. In fact, it's now not. Cities are prohibited from banning these sign walkers on city sidewalks. Scottsdale had a limit where you had to be on the property of the business for which you were spinning the sign or holding the sign. And the state legislation has since basically made that not doable for cities. So yes and no. I think we still have this sort of police powers ability that if someone is spinning a sign and obstructing traffic or pedestrian traffic, we can shut that down. But someone sort of standing on a corner where they're not interfering with pedestrian traffic is very difficult to ban.
So people that would be holding up signs for donations, that would be covered under that.
You mean like a panhandler type situation? Yes, that's our current city code, which we amended, I think, just under 3 years ago. Sort of got our, I guess we call it aggressive solicitation, or for lack of a better term, panhandling. We got that more in tune with what the courts have said we're allowed to do. We're really only allowed to ban or restrict solicitations on the streets if it's what's considered aggressive, and that can include within certain feet of an ATM or financial institution, those kinds of things. And our current city code goes pretty much as far as we can go when it comes to solicitation or asking for donations on city streets.
Any further comment from the public?
Richard Steelman, Prescott. Mayor, Council, I'd just like to make a comment. And the first day I came into Prescott, I saw lettering almost on every store here in downtown by a man named Dave Palmer. It's done in a Western style lettering. It meets with the theme of this city, fantastic. This man is not here, but he does a whole lot for a whole lot of establishments that really project a theme, the 1890s and so forth, here in Prescott. And he's got work on walls, on brick walls, on front of stores, everywhere. And then one day I saw him actually draw a crowd of 20 people watching him do his work. He's fantastic. And just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Mayor and Councilor, Kendall Jaspers, Prescott Downtown Partnership. How could I not resist a chance to talk about downtown a little bit? I see three issues. One, the issue that downtown, if you open it up to downtown, you have to open it up to everywhere. You know, beyond the boundaries of the historic district downtown, pretty much all the businesses are what we call destination driven. You know, if you make a decision to drive to that business to go in their parking lot, whereas downtown is pretty much dependent on foot traffic. So we work very hard to get feet on the street there and to give information to the people who are using it as pedestrians. I am concerned that we might end up in a position where we're whipsawed between the sign code and the historic preservation and when it comes to what we would do without those. If you look at downtown, so much of its awnings, those awnings cover up almost all the building signs are above the awnings. If you're walking underneath, unless that business owner has done lettering that may or may not be legal on their building, it may not be very easy to identify that as a business. I think there's a lot of parts of town where the businesses don't have the width to be able to do this, what we do downtown. Their sidewalks aren't wide enough. If they don't have a setback and they're right up against the street, many of them aren't big enough to do it anyway. So they wouldn't be allowed just because of that. So it takes care of itself to some extent. And the last point is, and I agree with a couple of the comments here, is code enforcement would be brutal. I mean, I have a little more history with this sign code. This started back in the late 80s when we started getting into the sandwich signs and some things like that. And it was partly generated by scofflaws, people who were just putting signs out. They were against the rules. And when the city did the cityscape, they kind of said, well, it'd be nice if people could identify these businesses, and it just sort of growed. So. And then the policy caught up with what was actually happening. So, you know, I think enforcement would be very difficult. So it's not an easy choice. Good luck.
Thank you. Anybody else like to make a comment? Okay, I think we're going to move on here in a moment, but I think there's enough information basically from the council here. I think we need to move forward and look at probably a total ban.
And we can do that. And the only other, as far as do you want to schedule it for a potential voting session at this point or further discussion, I guess?
I think it's time to move this to a vote.
And then what we'll propose as as a sort of a final option is some sort of delayed effective date so that there's time to get them. Normally an ordinance will take effect in 30 days after adopted. Can always take effect immediately under emergency clause. There's the other option of having some sort of delayed effective date, sort of communicate the message out to folks who can kind of prepare to come up with alternatives if this does in fact pass.
Okay. Any final comments from anybody?
Yeah, I would like to ask one more question, specifically of the attorney. Was it solely the Supreme Court's decision that has led us to sit here and discuss this again?
I think that was the primary mover of this issue. That the Gilbert case came down with some pretty substantial changes to how the courts are now supposed to look at content-based distinctions of signage.
What in our current code is in conflict with the Gilbert case?
Well, our code, the right-of-way sign, or the right-of-way code that deals with temporary signs is almost exclusively content-based. If you have a political sign, these are the rules. If you have a sandwich, a commercial sign, these are the rules. If you have a real estate sign, these are the rules. And so all of the exceptions to the ban of temporary signs in the right-of-way, if you have an event sign, these are the rules. They're all based on the nature of the message or the nature of the speaker or the content of the message. So I think that's where, by deleting those exceptions is really the only way to come into compliance with the Supreme Court's interpretation of content-based regulation for temporary signs.
Thank you for your explanation.
There's no more comments. We'll move on to 1C.
Item 1C, review of city-owned real property holdings for potential disposal.
Good afternoon, Council and Mayor. I'm Don Hirsch with the Public Works Department. I'm the real property specialist for the city. Hope you all had a wonderful new year. We're going to have a little discussion on the city-owned real property, kind of a review of the holdings for a potential disposal. There's been some discussion on the possibility the city may have some properties we may dispose of. To give you a little background, in the early 1990s, City Council went through a similar process on identifying surplus real properties. Properties were identified that they wanted to be sold, and they were sold, and proceeds were put into the city's Capital Improvement Special Reserve Fund. From the inception of that CISRF fund, $612,579 were received from the sale of the real property. That's a small, minor amount of the actual revenue deposited into that fund. Some of the projects were done with the CISRF fund for the downtown parking garage, expansion of the library, the new adult center, public safety radio infrastructure, dispatch center construction, downtown fire station, airport improvements to support the Horizon Air, development projects for Lowe's and the shops of the Gateway, airport capital grants matches, rodeo ground property exchange, and a fire station refurbishment. GASB 54, which Mark had referred to earlier, moved reporting of the CISRF from the Special Revenue Fund to a committed general fund balance. And at June 30th, 2015, this balance was $2,251,625. On this slide here shows the Chino Valley Paulden area. The properties in the upper left-hand corner, they're going to be the Big Chino Water Ranch the city purchased. As you kind of go towards the center of the map, just below center, off right of center, is a small parcel. That particular one is the Weber Well. Just kind of give you an idea where some of these properties are at. Directly below that, there's a little orangish area. That particular area is the Dugan Wells area. It's just south of the Big Chino. The other areas that you see there all have to do with the water production and distribution facilities in the Chino Valley area. Yes, Councilman.
That the upper well, when you're, that's Paulden, I assume.
Yeah, Paulden would be the one just basically almost in the center, just right of center.
Now, is that a water production property, or is it our water portfolio? What's the reason of owning that?
I'll be going through that on the next slide.
Okay.
Actually, I've kind of identified each one of those properties specifically so we can see what each one is and how they're used and about the size of them. On this particular slide here, the first ones you see in purple are all part of the Big Chino Water Ranch. There's importation supplies of 6,064 acre-feet of groundwater rights are accompanying with those, part of the comprehensive agreement number 1. And we have the monitoring and the modeling wells that we have there. The next parcel coming down is that Weber well that you were just talking about. That one in particular there was a historic acquisition for water supplies from the Big Chino. Again, comprehensive agreement number 1 applies to that with monitoring and modeling again. If the city was ever to do anything with that property, would need to maintain some wellhead protection around that particular well. The next ones on there that are in blue, they're actually city production wells. They're varying sizes and so forth on them.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Councilman.
I think that's one of the reasons I somewhat have an issue with some of these things. A good example would be, and we've had them in the portfolio for a long time, the Weber well at 27.64 acres, maybe to protect the wellhead or whatever you want to call that. But then we have the Dugan well that's 210.96 acres. Why would we need 210 acres to protect a well when the other one's at 27?
On the Dugan well, let me look at that one up real quick. On the Dugan wells, that's actually has to do with, 1 second here, purple. Modeling rights on that one, and that's possible future water production. I have that on the next slide too. We can talk about that one. That's going to be right here. The Dugan wells, that's going to be the bottom 3 that you see on there. Those are 3 wells, part of the Dugan purchase, historically contemplated for future water production. It's equipped with water level monitoring, and it'll be that way for the next 6 years. The monitoring supports the comprehensive agreement number 1 contract. Again, wellhead protection would be required on that. The 2 of those, they are very small parcels, which would probably be very difficult to do anything without maintaining the wellhead protection. The other one is about 120 acres. That one would be possible to do something with part of it, but we would still have to maintain the wellhead protection around that. That would have to be identified through the staff doing recommendations on how much would have to be required for wellhead protection on that particular parcel.
Again, it goes back from my standpoint, and I've been asking to look at this for a long time, is a simple fact that if it was identified by staff or by our water folks that protection of that wellhead of 119.56 and only having it at 20, we have 100 acres that we're sitting in Chino Valley, Arizona, that we have the responsibility and the liability to maintain, when that could be relinquished to go back into the water fund to do something different than what it's doing today. That's the only reason why I bring that up. And the times that we're dealing with, I understand that can't go back into the general fund because it's in the water fund. However, when you start talking about capital adventures like moving the Big Chino forward and wanting to have money and stuff in an account, there's no reason to have the land sitting there doing zero when we could possibly market that, put the money aside to help move our Big Chino water ranch forward. That's my thought. We're always talking about money. Where are we going to get it? Here's 100 acres right here. What does that bring the city of Prescott if we're on the open market?
Thank you, Councilman. The other properties on this particular slide do have the Dugan wells at the top, which we were talking about. There's another 210 acres at the top. That's around surrounding those wells also. So in reference to your question, there's actually closer to about 400 acres total in that general vicinity. Okay, Councilman. Next one's coming down. We're going to have surface water rights attached to them, and they're all the ones around the Sullivan Dam, the Del Rio Springs area, on each one of those particular properties. This we have surface water rights. And as we had mentioned, all these were acquired from the water funds. Moving down to the Prescott general area. There's a map of the city-owned properties. You have the airport in the upper right, the Goldwater Lake area down in the lower right, and then city parks and lakes. And you'll see various other smaller parcels throughout the area. A lot of them have to do with city infrastructure for moving water and wastewater to where it needs to go.
Can I ask a question again?
Yes, Councilman.
That you need to understand, it's the first time I've seen this, so I'll have some questions. But on the last page, the Del Rio, near Del Rio Springs, you have in parentheses SW right, which is surface water right. What does that number indicate?
I do not have the answer to that one, Councilman.
Okay.
I'd have to get that information from the water portfolio manager.
Because if there's a surface right amount of acreage or water rights, water attached to that, I would like to know what that is. And at some point in time, do we have to hold on to the piece of property to continue to have that surface water right?
Well, a lot of questions, Councilman and City Council. Today's presentation is to provide a listing of properties that can then be narrowed in the future based upon council discussion.
Thank you.
As we move to the area around the city of Prescott, there are numerous parcels. Yes, Mayor.
Council Lamberson's got one comment.
Thank you. Since we've been having a question or two.
Councilman?
It's my thought process that there's only so much land.
Correct.
And some of it the citizens of Prescott own. My question is, are we using that land to the best advantage of the city and to the people that actually are stockholders in this city? There's opportunities on that land partnering with the private sector in true public-private partnerships to generate revenue off that land rather than sell the land. Once it's gone forever. But when you partnership, very similar to what we did with Trader Joe's, in a manner that's financially productive for this community, it's like the gift that keeps on giving. And I really think as we move forward, I would like to try and concentrate my thought process differently than selling off our land. How do we use that land to our best advantage? Does it really make sense to leave the land around Willow and Watson fallow when you can develop that land in a manner to collect both bed tax and sales tax off that land? But if we don't ask the private sector, we don't ask people to come in and develop our property differently than just leaving it sit there, I don't think we're doing our due diligence on behalf of the taxpayers of the city.
Thank you, Councilman.
Okay, continue.
On this slide here, I have a breakdown on each of these parcels. I'm going to show in more detail as we go through them. I'll start off with the next one, which is going to be the old South Reservoir. The South Reservoir on South Senator Highway. It's about just over 2.25 acres. On that particular parcel, the tank was abandoned in place due to ADQ regulations. We can no longer use it, and that's why we ended up building the new tank to the east. It was abandoned in place. The structure itself is about 26,000 square feet, and it's about 14 feet deep into the earth. So, and the topography on it is actually fairly steep all around the tank. As far as repurposing it, probably be difficult. Calculate out to be about 1,700 cubic yards of fill to fill that tank up. It does have amazing views and stuff. It's about the 270-degree views if anyone's not ever been up there. Currently, the city has to maintain around that and maintain the fence around it, and also check on it occasionally to make sure no vandalism is occurred by prying up the corrugated roofing and stuff forth on that particular parcel. And that parcel is also zoned single family 9, just to give you some more information on that particular parcel. Next one we'll talk about is Tank Road Tank. Tank Road Tank was abandoned as part of the Zone 19 project. We actually removed the tank. We acquired it through a plat for the first portions of it, and you'll also see 2 smaller little yellow rectangles on the left-hand side of that. We acquired each of them from the adjacent property owner via a quitclaim deed. We need a little bit more space when it was actually there. particular parcel actually came, when we acquired those two little extra pieces, actually came from the streets fund on that particular parcel. It's no longer needed by the city at this point in time, that particular parcel. The property owner to the north has actually expressed interest in purchasing it over the last couple of years. Next parcels we have is the old adult center parking areas. They're just on south of Larkin. They're about 0.68 acres total, about 3.34 acres each. Currently, they are zoned multifamily, medium density, which would allow for like fourplex properties on them. The properties to the south are basically done that. They've actually built fourplexes on almost all of them down that street.
What are they, is it just a parking lot for general use?
They are current. Well, they were originally the old adult center parking. The old adult center was just to the east of it, and they were using those as parking lots. The one, as you can see, is paved for parking. The other one is more like a drive area, but they are just flat and ready to be built on.
So Don, this is now the Boys and Girls Club area, right? I mean, they use
Yes,
that. The
correct,
parking lot
Councilwoman.
for-
Yes, that is now the Boys and Girls Club. And they have their parking also directly to the north and south of their building currently. Another property I actually get questions on fairly often is the McCormick property that the city has. It's over on McCormick Street. It's a 0.46 acre parcel. That property actually has some deed restrictions on it that it cannot be sold until 2022. It absolutely cannot be because of deed restrictions on it. It's got about a 6,300 square foot building on that property plus the parking lot.
We own the building?
Correct. We do, Councilwoman. Next one we have is the Wildland Fire Station number 7 on 6th Street. It's about 1.3 acres total. There's like we'll call it a western half and an eastern half. They're almost exactly the same size, about 2/3 of an acre each. The one on the western side has a building on it. I think it was about 2,200 square feet on that particular one. Property on Eastwood Drive that the city has. It is across the street from Eastwood Drive from Ecker Park. It's a 4.39 acre parcel. It's currently being evaluated for a regional streamwater detention basin by staff. You get a lot of water runoff coming off of Ecker Park and also down the mountain coming down through there, and the water kind of continues through that parcel down Penn and Carlton, down Ruth, and it actually goes all the way down to Gurley at times, and major events actually end up all the way down by the ball fields at Yavapai College. And we're looking to construct a regional retention basin on it to help stem the water flows, to slow them down, to maintain them when they come across there, so that we get being more metered out. But that is another piece of vacant land currently, and that one particular is also zoned single family 9.
This is a piece of property that is really beautiful. It's got some large junipers on it. And talked with Charlene Craig from Friends of Acker about the idea of putting in another dog park here and calling it the Acker Natural Dog Park and run it by Joe Baines. And I think there's some potential here to actually use it for a good purpose, in addition to the storm detention.
Yeah, the storm detention from the preliminary plans that I've seen for it would take just portion of that. It would not take all of it, and it definitely could be a beautified area from different things I've seen of that all around that. Property northeast of the Prescott Airport, 72, a little over 72 acres. Currently, APS is releasing a little over 30 acres from us currently. Their lease on that expires in 2021 on that. And the staff is also currently evaluating the site for a possible airport well number 4 to be installed on that property. Another property I actually get questions on occasionally is the archery range in town. A lot of people don't even know it exists. But it's 25 acres across Willow Creek Road from Embry-Riddle. The city owns that by a patent deed from the BLM, and in that patent deed it is states in there that it can never be sold. But that is a property that is.
Could it be leased?
I do not have an answer to that, Councilman.
Thank you.
Could we
I
put a
can find
mobile
it.
home park on it? RV park, sorry.
We could do some research on it and see what the patent would allow for, if you like. I'll make a note of that. Last item I have on here is property south of Goldwater Lake. We actually own 94.18 acres down there. There's three parcels. One of them's really small. The property's been leased by the Friendly Pines Camp since 1955. Their current lease expires in 2023 on that property. And that was purchased with the water funds. At this time, if you have any questions, comments.
I have a question. Would the proceeds from a sale of any of this land have to go back to the fund that actually bought the land?
That is correct, Councilman.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question, too, about the lease income on any of these leased properties. Do you have that information?
Yeah, I do. Let me grab my notes here real quick. On the APS lease out at the airport, their current rental rate's a little over $44,000 a year, and we have 8% escalators in there per year on that particular parcel. Another one that we leased, the one that's to Friendly Pine Camp south of Goldwater Lake, that's a little over $10,000 a year on that particular parcel down there.
Thank you, Mayor. If we do just pick a property X that we bought with water fund and we leased it, okay, would that lease amount have to go to the water fund? Because I know the school district, they get away with leasing a building, a school that they're like North Point, and it goes into their general fund.
I would defer that to Mark.
Well, I'd defer it to legal, but I think that's something we could look at with legal and come up with an answer. Generally when revenues from an enterprise fund that has a rate setting process are used to buy a property, generally the revenues have to go back to that fund. But I believe there are some exceptions.
Let's say they sell their school. I'm using the school system. They sell it, it would have to go back into capital expense. So to build another school or doing a capital improvement. But under what they're doing is they are leasing it and they're using it in their general fund. So that's just, maybe you can call them.
Yeah.
Councilman Blair.
I have a question for the city manager. If this being a presentation, if there's ones that we're interested in maybe looking at and doing something differently, should we put that list together for you to bring back at a different time?
I think that would be workable, and if you have any specific questions or proposals, that would be helpful as well.
Because I hear I'm looking at the airport property that we have out there. Even though it might be a well field idea and also solar on there, it is 72 plus acres. I know that we're going to have to buy land to extend the runway. Have we addressed the property owner that owns the land above the runway to see if he may be interested in doing a trade so that we can trade a piece for a piece rather than us holding onto a piece of property that seemingly is just sitting there? So those are the things I'm interested in.
I've talked to him, and he's willing to work with us.
Okay, good. See, and that's a good idea. So anyway, I'll put together a list because, again, looking at the wildfire stations down there, valuable commercial property, money came out of the general fund. The general fund's where we're strapped right now. I know it's not going to give us the big balloon that we're looking for to help pay off PSPRS, but also the property at the old adult center, the 2 lots that are sitting there vacant, that is general fund money as well. So if we can do something by raising some revenues that way to put back, it shows the public goodwill from the city of Prescott that we're trying to minimize our losses out there. So,
Councilman Lamerson.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciated your comments, sir, Mr. Manager, with regards to certain things that we haven't done yet. And I don't think we've gone to the fullest and highest area that we can to evaluate the reuse of the properties that we own. For example, the one Councilman Blair was just talking about, with that being in such a high rent district over there on a industrial commercial stretch of road, there may be a way to offset some of our general fund shortages by not selling the land, but working with the private sector to develop the land for a gift that keeps on giving. And I haven't heard yet any proposals that have come forward to say how we can work within the private sector, very similar to the couple of the things that we've done in the past few years that have been proven very successful for this community without selling off this community's assets. When we've sold them off, they're gone. When we use them, we can use them differently. And you're our property expert. You're the guy we hired. I don't want to use the word philosophically, but if you're a property use expert kind of guy, does anything I have to say on this issue make any sense whatsoever?
That would be yes.
Absolutely
I guess what
correct.
you're asking for is you'd like to see those properties you feel that an RFP should be considered
Not
for?
that I feel, but we have a property expert that we hired that the taxpayers are paying for to evaluate and see what makes sense and what doesn't. We have some worthless pieces too that are not reusable for much of anything, except being a liability that we pay to maintain. But we've hired somebody who's an expert in this field that's involved in development, redevelopment, use and reuse of properties. And instead of getting rid of our assets, how can we better use our assets to help this community to move forward? And one of them isn't to get rid of your assets. It's not. It's to redevelop those assets. Very similar to what we did with the X amount of dollars. We did this and this and this. So all I'm asking is that something be brought back to discuss for RFPs on certain pieces of redevelopable property to where we can actually go into the private sector in the guise of job creation, whatever you want to call it, but economic development opportunities on behalf of the citizens of Prescott to where we don't have to keep looking at tax increases. We've already got the stuff here to do some of this work with.
And Mayor, if I may, the idea of locking in the property at the airport sooner than later, before that may change hands, and then it changes the whole picture. And that is indeed trading a piece of property for a property, and that's a gift that keeps on giving, is to keep the Forest Service out there, to keep Embry-Riddle out there, to bring in larger planes. Those are things that we should be thinking about doing stuff immediately. And I would suggest the sooner the better.
Okay. Any more council discussion before I go to the public? Any public comment?
Daniel Mattson again, Merritt Street. Anyway, that parking lot next to the old adult center, I've been over there. Mind you, the launch pad is there also, the teen center. They don't really have enough parking on their own property to fill their needs. And there's those two lots. I would like to suggest that at least the one paved parking lot is definitely being used for a good purpose in its support for our youth in the community. And I would think long and hard before disposing of that one. The lot to the south of it that is not paved, that might be a good candidate to sell or do something else with. But I'd like to suggest that the other parking lot, I don't know if you want to figure out a way to get them to lease it from you or something, but I would continue to make it available to them for parking. They really need it. And I don't know where else they'd move the parking to. There really isn't another place in that general area. And I would remind everyone the McCormick property was donated to the city. I believe the person donating it had the intention of that being used for the fire department to put together their administrative buildings, and I would think it would be a good idea to honor their wishes so that other people who think about donating things to the city wouldn't use that as an example of how their wishes weren't followed. Other than that, I didn't see, I mean, there was the one property, said the property to the north was interested in, I guess, the abandoned tank there. Sell it to them. But other than that, I don't really see an awful lot you can do with what you've got.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Good afternoon, Ralph Hess, Prescott. I'm encouraged to hear the council people talk about alternative uses prior to disposing of the property. I think that's a great idea. And before selling any of the property, the only thing I'd add to that is to consider perhaps the use of some of the property that would not have a business or a marketing type value might be good for a small park in neighborhoods that don't have park areas. Low impact park, put a picnic table, garbage can, something like that, so that I don't know where any of these properties are since I wasn't able to get a list before the meeting. But for instance, the tank property might very well be a neighborhood park. And I think Prescott could use more of these small neighborhood parks.
Okay, thank you.
And you don't lose the property. So if you want to use it for something else later, you have that option later.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, do you think you have enough understanding of where we want to go on this issue?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today and spending a little bit of your time with us. This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.